Hereby call this meeting to order. This is the May 22nd, 2025 joint conceptual workshop between the Franklin Planning Commission and the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. We'll start with roll call. Commissioner Harrison. Present. Commissioner Allen.
Present.
Commissioner Franks.
Present.
Commissioner Lindsay is absent. Commissioner Orr is here. Commissioner Mann is absent. Commissioner McLemore.
Present.
Commissioner Williamson.
Present.
Alderman Peterson.
Here.
Mayor Moore is not here. Alderman Potts absent. Alderman Berger absent. Alderman Caesar absent. Alderman Blandon absent. Alderman Barnhill absent. Alderman Brown absent. Alderman Baggett.
Hey!
All right, we got one. Yay. He represents all of Bowman tonight, folks.
Oh, that's no pressure. I don't know that they agree to that.
Oh, and Alderman Peterson, of course. Our first item is item number 1, discussion of fiscal impact analysis tool as part of the annexation review process. Staff?
Thank you. So, for the majority of you, this is new information, as this was shared at a BOMA work session. So we are now welcoming our planning commissioners to a little bit of a discussion of this fiscal impact analysis tool that staff has been evaluating the last few months. And so I'm going to give you a brief overview of what we have looked at regarding this in the past and the next few steps and what we have done since I have spoken about this since March. So a little bit of a background, we are getting continued requests for annexation, both contiguous and non-contiguous, to city limits. And due to the rising infrastructure and service costs, we're looking at studying the fiscal impacts of these annexations and whether or not we could develop some type of tool to help our decision makers look at these annexations in a different light on how much it could potentially cost the city to service these areas that are outside of our current service area. Now, these types of studies have been done in the past at a different scale, and just to determine what exactly the potential infrastructure costs could be. This was done a few years ago specifically for the Goose Creek Basin that you can see there on the right-hand side, just to determine exactly what the infrastructure costs might be should the city pursue development in certain areas. And so should those areas come into the city limits. So as part of this, we are looking at the revenue that the city could bring in from annexing properties. There are a plethora of one-time fees, from everything from just tap installation fees and water impact fees to larger fees such as road impact fees, as well as recurring different taxes and things once a parcel comes into city limits that the city begins collecting property tax, different commercial taxes, sales tax, things like that. Along with these, we are looking into the costs that are incurred from annexing properties, things like upsizing infrastructure, creating new facilities, buying new equipment, new staffing needs for any areas that are brought into city limits that may not be contiguous or are just on the far edges of our services. Now, this fiscal study that we are examining the potential for, staff has looked at where exactly in the timing this might occur. So before you is just a quick rundown of the annexation and the plan of services process. So annexations do come in with a draft plan of services, and they go to a work session and a BOMA reading before any formal petition for annexation would occur. So now this fiscal study would be after the draft plan of services. So we've already looked into whether or not the city is interested in annexing a property, and they have come in for a formal annexation request. Staff has identified that this fiscal study could be an early part of that annexation study. So prior to it reaching the stage where it would be read before both Planning Commission and the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, we would use this tool to determine roughly what, positive or negative costs there would be to potentially annexing a property. So this was brought before the Development Services Advisory Committee or Commission in early March. And some of the feedback that we received from them was that they would be interested in this actually occurring earlier in the process, and having this worksheet available to them so that they could run numbers by themselves and they could really determine exactly what would make the numbers, look the best, come out the best, whether they are determining their pro formas and calculating exactly what would need to go into a development. There was concern about how this could impact the annexation and the development decisions and what weight this tool might actually carry in the decision making. As well as just adding additional uncertainty to the process for applicants. What happens if it looks unfavorable versus favorable? How does that change decision making? How does that change the flow of the actual request and processes? And they understand that the need for us to grow in a responsible manner, but there is some hesitations and concerns using this type of tool. So currently, staff is working at integrating sales tax categories to gain an average sales tax to really gather just a conservative total of sales tax generation that might occur from adding new households into city limits. We are working with other city departments to determine the average maintenance costs that go into everything from roadways to water, sewer, assuming it is in our water district. And just the different aspects of infrastructure once something does come into city limits that the city now has to maintain and keep up. And we have begun running examples of approved developments to really try to gather some sort of baseline to figure out what these numbers would actually look like for certain developments prior to it potentially being used for anything that hasn't been constructed or approved yet. We want to make sure we understand what these numbers actually mean for certain types of developments. So our next steps, obviously today is Joint Conceptual Workshop. We are returning to Development Services Advisory Commission on June 3rd. And as time goes on and this continues to evolve, we will bring it back once again for a work session update with some examples on June 24th is our plan. So I'm happy to answer any questions or take down any comments that you all have about this specific item.
Okay. Anyone have comments on this item?
I mean, I just said, I think it kind of makes sense looking at if you annex something, if it's going to be, just a huge, say, resource drain for any reason. Kind of only comment I thought, because I always think of like a devil's advocate on certain things, is that if we're looking at the ROI as kind of a point for annexation, like, hey, this ROI could be great if we do commercial, and because we all know that the higher tax revenues are going to be more commercial based, which is also usually a little bit more density. And I know a lot of the things that we've seen come through in annexation, a lot of the citizens just don't want the density. They're looking for more rural settings in a lot of these areas. And also when we look at demands of water and running utilities out, that becomes more of an expense in some ways. You have impact fees, but just even long-term maintenance. So I think that would be the only thing that I would just, wouldn't want it be used for. I think it makes a lot of sense. It's a useful tool, but where the ROI pushes higher density for commercial nodes kind of as a point of arguing from some of the developers that, hey, look, city, this is really good. We can put all this density and you can make more money. But just know that we always kind of get that, and we always see that as a little bit of a battle as far as zoning and planning and expanding. So that was just an observation. So.
Yes.
Well, I guess that's my whole. I want to make sure. Well, okay, so I won't even go there because I'm making an exception. So my question to you is, compare this for me to our current rezoning process, because I have something in my head and I don't want to speak on it until I know exactly. Is this solely from a financial standpoint? Because I have something in my head that I don't want to speak on, because making an assumption is not the way to go on anything.
I'm not sure how to answer that.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure that I'm gonna answer this.
Okay, so I am a property owner, and I want my property annexed today, before this happens. Currently, it comes to Planning Commission, thumbs up, thumb down, recommendation to the Board of Mayor and Alderman, who makes the final. This sounds to me like I'm a property owner, we make this change, and it goes to BOMA for them to look at, and then it comes back to us, because they're gonna look at to see financially, does it make sense? And then they make a decision. Financially, you do a study, and it says, oh, the rate of return on this looks great. And then it comes back with a great, or a thumbs up, thumbs down on rate of return, and then it comes to us. So am I not hearing that? Because when I looked at that, it goes to a Board of Mayor and Alderman work session reading, and then it looks at the Envision Franklin data, and then it comes to the Franklin, if I'm going reading
Yeah.
top to bottom.
So the very first step, the draft plan of service and annexation initiation, that is just a step to see if the board is even interested in exploring the annexation at all. That currently does not go to Planning Commission. It has not. That was an added step in our process about maybe, I don't know the exact timeline, but maybe 7 to 8 years ago, maybe a little more, based on some annexations that went through the full process of full plan development and then were turned down. So this has been our process for a while, but this fiscal study, we're proposing as staff would come along with your Planning Commission packet when you would actually see the annexation. That would actually be the first time it is being seen on a public agenda. So that would be the first publication of the fiscal impact study, would be when it comes to Planning Commission. And then everything that goes to Planning Commission would move on to the Board of Mayor and Alderman during their work session and when they're through their subsequent readings. So it would be all the same packet of information that's being seen at both bodies. At least that's how staff is currently proposing it. This is still evolving to some extent. We are just now starting on examples, and the way that information comes to us in the process could shift where in the process this ends up falling, but we will update you if there are changes to that.
The reason I say that is because having that information is great, but we still have to consider what does Envision Franklin say and what is best for that, right? Because having that, because that was my concern, is exactly what the what the other commissioner has said, is because it needs to make sense. Yes, financially, yes, but it also needs to make sense with what the vision is for that and what the, okay, I'll hush. Thank you.
That's correct. This would be an added item within your civic clerk items of just additional information. So
Okay.
the way that staff reviews everything would still stay the same. The process would stay the same. This would just be an additional
Gotcha.
bit of information.
Good, thank you. I just want to put the cart before the horse. So my assumption would have been totally wrong. Thank you.
And to add to what Commissioner Williamson was asking about a little bit or commenting on, one of the reasons we're looking at doing some examples are really to look at how much the city spends on solely residential development now on existing subdivisions to really establish a baseline. So if a only residential development came in the future, we would have a point of comparison to something similar and how much the city already pays for serving that type of development that is more equitable to what is being proposed.
That makes sense, yeah, and especially, that was another thought that I was thinking is that, you know, if this comes in a packet and say it's like the first project that's coming in with this, the first thing we're gonna ask for is, what does this compare to? So,
Yeah, I would say, I would just be very careful in looking at the number and making a judgment on should it be annexed based on the result of this tool, because more than likely it's going to come in negative. But I would look at it more as, is this a good investment for the city for the future? Are we going to have long-term gains for the investment now? And most of the time I would think yes. Either that, or if you say no now, you're probably going to end up doing it 10 years down the road and it's cost you 3 times as much on the utility side. So just be very careful how you use it. It's just like I said earlier, another way of looking at something. It's not the sole way to evaluate an annexation. Go ahead.
So I think all the comments are great, and I agree. I think there's I don't know, this process though, and BOMA, we're the ones that take out the debt on the infrastructure. We're the ones that, which is why we vote with the recommendation, because at the end of the day, the costs, we've got to figure out how to pay for them. So I think you're right. How should this tool, I think guiding us with how BOMA should use this tool in their purview, and how Planning Commission should use the tool in their purview, because you're right. If it comes back negative, then and Planning Commission thinks that it's the right land use for the area ultimately, but they're looking at this negative number, and it fits in Vision Franklin. Is that going to be a no vote for planning? And I think that's something that I think there's some guidance that needs to really be. We really need to be educated on how to use this, because also if BOMA really wants to see like vision of an area to grow, and knowing that it's going to be infrastructure costs, and that's what their constituents want or have said, or the vision that the group has, that also needs to be taken into account. They're never going to be, some of them might be positive, net positive. It's very, very possible, especially in your commercial centers where they are. Residential on the extremities, maybe not so much. I would also look at the cost, because there is, as Alderman Barnhill would say, well, wait a second, a lot of these costs we're not paying for.
Right.
And so, they're going to have to run the sewer out there. They're going to have to do this, that. So sometimes on our CIP, this comes into play because we see the total number. And there's confusion. Well, that's a McEwen East or whatever is $45 million project, but we got $35 million in federal grants. Well, that is costing the taxpayers $10 million. So I think that, and I know that's going to be super complex to get this to, because every situation is going to be different. But I think the net cost is, and especially with these residential improvement district, that is going to add another level of complexity to this, because some of those costs will be borne by that possible financing model. And so you've got a big job ahead of you. But I think, though, here's what I want to see from this is the community comes in on a project and says there's $500 million worth of infrastructure costs out here. This is a bad decision. Nobody knows. Nobody on staff can give a spot-on answer. Certainly BOMA can't. Certainly Planning Commission can't. And these numbers get thrown around. And so what is true? The plan of services, the cost of services and all that stuff. I think this is important because there needs to be some realistic way to figure the number out. If nothing else, just so that there's something that everybody can work under. When someone says something's going to cost $500 million to build a neighborhood, I got a head scratch. There's no way. But we don't have any resource or anything to say, well, no, actually, this is kind of a directionally accurate. So moving in that direction, don't get lost in the weeds, but directionally accurate information on costs and the impact of those impact fees that we've raised. Those things are going to add a lot, and that needs to be reflected in this too, so the community sees just how much the impact fees are going to help the city out too. I would even look at moving this fiscal study. I've always thought that we should consider moving the Envision Franklin Amendment paired with the plan of services annexation rezoning. How many months? So there's 2 readings on this first draft plan. Isn't it 2 reading, or is it 1 reading on the first phase draft plan? Is that 1 vote?
There's 1 vote on the there's one single BOMA reading on the draft plan of services.
In a
and
work session 2
annexation
weeks before.
And then a work session 4 weeks before, because we do a public notice for a public hearing.
So that's 2 months. Envision Franklin amendment is how many meetings is that? That's 3.
That's one planning commission meeting,
One planning and then a joint conceptual
if they choose. It's not required.
if they choose.
Yes.
And then the plan of service. I think pairing this Envision Franklin amendment process possibly with this and then having it, because how many times have y'all looked at an Envision Franklin plan amendment and you've wondered what the development plan is going to be? Actual development plan. And I know we've talked about this, but
The
y'all,
tricky part with that, I will say, it's possible to do it on the same agenda, but you would be voting on a zoning district the same night. The planning commission would have to vote on a recommendation for a zoning district on a property the same night as they establish the land use in Envision Franklin. So that's kind of, if you don't approve the Envision Franklin amendment, then you have a rezoning hearing that then you don't know what to zone it anymore, and you're debating on the floor, essentially, which is not always effective.
well, I hear you. There's other communities that do pair them together. And I think, might be something to think about. And yeah, if you don't approve the Envision Franklin amendment, you're probably not going to approve the rezoning. That's the thing. If you're not going to approve the Envision Franklin amendment, you're not going to probably approve the rezoning recommendation, right? So it's kind of like,
Does annexation require,
say what now?
does that require the land use plan?
Eventually, possibly.
Not every annexation requires an Envision Franklin plan amendment. A lot of annexations that come in, there's already an established design concept, and what's being proposed on the property is already aligning with Envision Franklin.
Understood.
We do
Yeah.
have some lately that have come in where there are required Envision Franklin amendments, but typically with annexation, that's not the case in the majority of
That's
the
right.
times.
No, I understand. Will we do this with? That's all I've got. But I'm following. I'm tracking now. Thank you.
And if I was the applicant, I may want to see if it passes the draft through BOMA before I carry it further.
That's what I was gonna say too as well. Because they'll have an opportunity, then when it gets to us, they would have heard already. And we have all the numbers and all the figures on what it possibly could cost. And we'll have that information when it comes to us, maybe,
Yeah.
possibly. So I don't have a problem with it being the draft plan going to FOMA before it comes to the planning commission.
Okay. Any other thoughts from anyone?
I don't think I understood what you just said. Say that again.
The draft plan, you were making, the comments that were made about it going to BOMA first. Why it's going to BOMA first, yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't have a problem with that, going to BOMA before it comes to the planning commission.
Then it's kind of been vetted out already.
So the process from top to bottom is how we currently do annexations.
Right.
So if this were to be incorporated into them, the big red arrow is really just when staff would be doing the fiscal study, and it would then be incorporated into all packets then forward. But staff wouldn't be doing this at any time beforehand because we just wouldn't have enough information, and or the board hasn't decided whether or not they're even interested in exploring the potential for annexation of the property. So staff wouldn't spend time to look into all of this and calculate all of these things if it's just going to go and a draft plan of services, gets denied.
But currently, what's the timeline under the current policy versus the timeline under this proposed policy?
It would not change.
Yeah. All this slide is showing is where the fiscal study fits into the normal operation.
Correct.
Well, no, I don't have a problem because we're not bound by that. Now, as long as we're not bound, we're not bound by anything that happens with that draft plan of service. So no, I don't have a problem.
Okay. Anything else? All right. Item number 2, discussion of city-sponsored Envision Franklin Plan Amendment, the UGB update. Staff?
Thank you. So we will move on to a city-sponsored amendment for Envision Franklin that really centers around the newly adopted updates to our urban growth boundary. So on November 13th of 2024, the countywide growth plan was completed, which involved us adopting our new urban growth boundary. So we removed roughly 2,500 acres from the urban growth boundary in very specific key areas, as well as added approximately 2,200 acres into the urban growth boundary, mostly in the Goose Creek area, as well as a few different parcels we realized were partially in the UGB, but partially outside of it. So we've cleaned up some of those lines sort of in the southern Lewisburg Pike area. So along with this, there are some proposed changes from staff to Envision Franklin, specifically providing design concepts to these newly added parcels that are now within the urban growth boundary. So we now have the jurisdiction to apply those design concepts, and extending the design concepts for those parcels that were previously partially in. We have proposed just extending to the edge of that parcel line the design concept that was currently already on a portion of the parcel. Our recommendations are consistent with the 2023 public draft, with the exception of 5 parcels in the Goose Creek area that were previously recommended for single-family residential. But because Connect Franklin was amended to shift the future Carruthers Parkway extension to the east, staff is now recommending these 5 parcels have the mixed residential design concept due to the shift of that major roadway. Additionally, staff is proposing new special considerations for landscape setbacks along future Carruthers and Paytonsville Road, similar to the existing scenic corridor overlays that exist within the city, as well as updating appendices A, B, and C, as well as our introductory maps to then show our newly adopted urban growth boundary, as well as adding a statement into our natural beauty guiding principle to support the Bee City initiative that the city has begun over the last couple years. We did have numerous community meetings from 2021 to 2023, as well as with the Goose Creek study and our Envision Franklin updates as we were drafting this out, and created a project webpage those years ago, franklintn.gov/Envision Franklin update, with all of the information as we went through that process. Staff also sent mailers to impacted property owners as well as everyone within 500 feet in early April, specifically those that had now been added into the urban growth boundary and that were going to be getting these design concepts, notified all of them, and then everyone within 500 feet. As well as we held open office hours on the 28th of April from 8 to 5 in case anybody had any questions or if they received a mailer and didn't understand what was happening. We wanted to make sure that we were available for any questions and any comments. So if you'll see here on the left, the proposed design concepts are the ones in color. The grayed out areas are parcels that already had design concepts. So all of those in color are the newly added parcels and their corresponding recommended design concepts. Additionally, you'll see sort of in this middle arrow area right in here, these are the parcels that previously had been single-family residential, and now staff is recommending mixed residential due to the Carruthers Parkway extension being shifted from roughly about here. I'm assuming you can see my mouse. Yeah, okay. From roughly about here further to the east along Paytonsville Road. So if you look on this right-hand side, you can see the overall recommended design concept map and how staff is recommending that density stay further to the western side, and as you get closer, further away from sort of the major corridor area, that it begins to become less dense and less dense as it reaches Williamson County. As I mentioned, there are a few proposed special considerations for Paytonsville Road, and the purpose of this is to not only transition from urban to rural in both land use, but also in setback and how driving along Paytonsville Road feels. So you can see that staff is proposing a 50-foot setback along this portion in this neighborhood mixed use recommended area, 100 feet here in this mixed residential area, and then 150 feet as we continue further east into Williamson County. Additionally, staff is proposing a 100-foot minimum setback along this Carruthers Parkway extension because there are a lot of relatively conceptualized rural areas along this portion with this neighborhood green recommended parcel here that comes along with that 60% open space. So we want to make sure that this portion of Carruthers would feel like a rural area, as well as continuing through this single family residential portion, as well as some of our mixed residential. This 100 feet is comparable to most of the developments on the southern portion of Lewisburg Pike. So the next steps, we will be seeing you all again on June 26th for a public hearing and a vote for these recommended changes, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Any comments on this one? Anyone? No?
Yes.
Okay, go for it.
You got the financial analysis. I mean, if you go back to your financial analysis slideshow, which you don't have to, the example you had was the road infrastructure cost, and it added up to about $320 million in this area.
Mm-hmm.
This is what we went through that Goose Creek study, and I kept talking about, and I know others did too. There's one road in, one road out. It's failing. The Goose Creek bypass is failing in those traffic studies, and this is a change. And if we're talking about what is the financial impact of these changes, and we have those numbers, and I'm really curious if this kind of density, where we looked at the financial analysis of those, how you use those road estimates, the road cost estimates. I know the sewer and all that capacity has kind of been figured out from the BOMA, or about to be. So the sewer is not as big of a deal as it is to me, the road network out here, and how the density is going to align with that, and if the impact fees we're now charging are going to pay for the roads. I also would love to have seen more of our rural character design concepts used instead of single family residential. I think the idea of Paytonsville Road possibly having more of that open landscape is what people want, and that's what those are designed to do. Rural reserve, neighborhood green with the 50 and 60% open space. The single family residential has what required open space? Is that 50%? No, that's not 50%. That's like 25.
It's what's required in the
It's whatever's
zoning
required in the
ordinance.
zoning ordinance.
Yeah, it doesn't have a
There's
special
no requirements
definition
from
on
Envision
top of
Franklin.
that.
So I think this is an interesting thing to discuss, the single family residential all the way out Paytonsville Road. I like how the hillsides have been bordered with the rural character areas. What we're seeing is when they're able to condense or do more housing types in even the 30 or 40%, you're getting more affordability, more likelihood for affordability because you get more units, and you're saving the open space. Look, I mean, this is a Ladd Park, which there's nothing wrong with Ladd Park, West Haven, these other subdivisions. What we've heard from BOMA is we want to preserve the rural character in these areas. So I would have liked to have seen, and this is y'all's document, by the way, so it doesn't really matter what I think on this. Y'all get to set it. But I do think those rural character design concepts possibly being used more out Paytonsville Road in different ways to protect that scenic corridor. you know, is nice. And you've done that. The Paytonsville Road 50-foot minimum setback. That's nice. But that's about a third of the setback required on Franklin Road, historic. Again, I think having the, you know, I don't think this would be bad, but I just think using those rural concepts where you can have that density in mix of housing types, not just single family residential, although that can be if they choose to do it in the rural reserve or village green or what have you. I don't know, that's the only comment I'd make is I would have liked to have seen maybe some, because that's beautiful. I mean, that's pretty country, and having that maintain some of that character would be of interest to me, but this is y'all's document.
I would comment, one of the things that I would say, and I hear what you're saying, but for someone who drives this every week to go to church on Sundays, and I'm out here all the time, one of the things that has happened on the other side where the county did their thing is that's gone. If you drive farther out there where there used to be rolling hills and pastures and all of that, that's gone. Allowing, and we'll say, and I know you guys, so Debbie Downer speaking, but that affordability, the mix of use and all that, yeah, the mix of use is there, but it's really not. You get differences. So when you look, you'll see different houses, right? You'll see townhouses, you'll see all of that. So really it's more of a visual thing. You just get a mix of use. So the affordability thing is really not there. But what I'm liking about this is you get the single family feel. The closest we're going to get to maintaining a country type, or maintaining an agriculture, or maintaining kind of the pastoral feel when you drive out this way, is with this type of plan, in my opinion. The staying away from being right there when you turn a corner, all you see are houses, is sticking with this type of plan, unfortunately, because it's gone as you go on out. Even when you get to Goosey Hill Road and you see where Marlowe is there now, or when you see these others. So I think that the horse has left the barn, and I think that this type of plan is what we need, at least on our side, is what the least that we can do. I hear what you're saying, I just disagree with what you're saying, Alderman.
Where do you think the yellow is what I'm talking about? Are we talking about the same thing? The yellow single family residence?
The light, yeah. And see, I think, okay, so this is what I'll say. So you're concentrating, in my opinion, on the open space, what's inside and on that. What I'm concentrating on is when you're driving along, because what the young man has been talking about is, you know, when you're driving along and having people not building right as you drive along, right? So having the feeling of we have single family homes, okay? And not putting that density out there. If you go out there now, when you're driving, part of having a country like feel is also not having 100 other cars out there with you, or not having to wait 10 minutes to drive out. So putting that much density out there, putting that many cars out there, that also takes away from the quality of life out there. It takes away from feeling like you're in the country when you have that much traffic out there. Also looking and seeing 500 houses instead of seeing 100 houses, or seeing the townhouses. That's not part of living or the country feel.
Sure.
Right. And so I understand what you're saying, but I think that in saying, in zoning this, or having this Envision Franklin have this part, at least our part of it, looking like this, it's going to look, compared to looking the way that some of the other parts out there, we're doing our part, in my opinion. At the open space, that I think, yeah, we could debate that. I just feel differently about that.
I have a question, Joe. I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna add real quick, and did you want to say
No, you
something?
go ahead.
Okay. As you're looking at the map, I totally understand what's being said about the yellow piece, the single family. I would just add that for our long range, as they were looking at this, and as we took in public comment during the Goose Creek study, we did hear a lot of, public feedback about wanting some single family, but we as staff tried to recommend a balance of design concepts. So you will see some significant areas, neighborhood green, especially where the hilltops come into play. You'll also see rural reserve as the transition on multiple properties as you go to the edge. So it's not all single family, but I understand what you're saying, that it is more of that kind of predominant land use type of what we already have in that particular area, but we tried to balance it out in certain areas where it made sense with some of the other design concepts.
I was just going to say, I like this proposal, the transitioning, the 50 feet, 100 feet, 150. I think it makes sense. I think y'all have done a great job with that, making those the changes in the transition from 50 to 150. So I think it's something that would be a good proposal that I would support.
What is an example of a neighborhood that exists today that is in single family residential? Like if we were to say that in the yellow is going to look like what?
Sorry, let me turn on my mic. I think one is Ladd Park, but it came in before the adoption of Envision Franklin. So we have a lot of design standards, lot sizes that differentiate now from what was in Ladd Park. You would see some scattering of single family residential along Clovercroft Road where parcels have come into the city, and even though that's identified as mixed residential in our map, we've had them come in as solely single family just by choice. And they've complied with our single family design concept in that way, even though they could have gone denser. We have not had a lot that have come in strictly as single family. We have a lot more mixed residential that have come in that incorporate townhomes specifically, or
But Ladd Park's probably the most
most
similar to what would be in the yellow.
Our design standards are.
What do you mean
the main
design
shift.
standards like the?
In terms of how lots have to front streets in a particular way, the lot sizes that are permitted and how they, need to vary. The setback of the garage is different. Some
But
of
not
those-
necessarily the density is not different.
The
It's just-
density is not different.
That's all. I think.
The light green color that's at the furthest most east, is that neighborhood green or rural reserve?
So this sort of
Right.
pale spearmint
Yeah,
color,
whatever that is. I know you're running out
that
of.
would be rural reserve.
Okay. And I guess why was that chosen over the single family for? I pictured it as you transition out, it starts to open up, but then I
So-
see something a little more denser than.
So rural reserve is less dense than single family. It requires 50% open space and a minimum of 1 acre lots.
Got it. So it's rural reserve, it's not neighborhood green.
Or half acre lots. So it ends up being 1 unit an acre, which is comparable to what the county has with MGA1.
That makes sense.
They look almost alike.
Yeah, I couldn't tell the greens apart.
Can you go to the second page there, where the UGB map?
This one?
No, the blue and the tan at the beginning.
Oh, this one.
That one too. On your Columbia Pike, you show that wedge that's already been developed as large tracts in the county. So you did not annex that, or you surrendered it basically. Correct?
If it,
That
So
big triangle?
everything in tan is in the current UGB. Everything in white is out.
But what I'm saying is that triangle there at the split, that 300 acres there, it's already built out and sold as large tracts. A lot of big houses on 5 acres minimum.
just because it may be in the tan area and in our UGB, those properties are not required to annex into the city unless a property owner chooses to do
Chooses.
so.
Right.
Okay,
So they can develop in the county.
so they can, okay, I see. So what is the plan of services though in that tan area? If the applicant comes like over by Hempeck Lane, Coleman Road, you've got that tan area that's not far from the blue.
We would develop a plan of services when an annexation request comes in. Right now, that area is not in our annexation capability study. It is not identified as a short or midterm growth area. So the city is not planning to extend infrastructure to that area in any of the foreseeable future. But if a development came in and proposed extending utilities, we would then draft a plan of service on how they would need to do that and pay for that.
But, what about the Hill Road property? I mean, is it part tan or is it all in the blue?
It's currently in the TAN. It's not been annexed yet, but the Harlan property is
Harlan.
going through the annexation process right now, but it has not been approved quite yet. So we'll see how that plays out.
Gotcha.
What's the time period on this other? We need to get that financial thing in a hurry.
We're doing our best. There's some added elements that still need to be considered with that.
But if you're going to have growth and economic impact, it looks like to me the major corridors like Columbia Avenue, 96, of course, Long Lane, out through there seems to be the appropriate areas versus sprawling on out past, on out, which y'all have done a good job of identifying the urban growth boundary. Protection for the rural area for sure.
So as part of Envision Franklin, one of the appendices is a feasibility analysis on where the soon-to-be growth areas would be versus the long-term growth areas. So those were brought into consideration in staff's recommendations when all of this went before the coordinating committee a couple years ago. So there is information that we like to refer people to, especially in the development community, of the areas that staff has highlighted as our likely growth areas in the short term.
Gotcha.
That incorporate those types of things that you were mentioning for roadway infrastructure, for water and sewer availability, that take all of those into account, and we really try to put a gradient on a lot of the areas of the city of green is most likely to be, developable versus red being we are not there yet, So we do have that information included in the Envision Franklin document, but it did all come into account as part of this Goose Creek study for developing the design concepts for that area, as well as the staff recommendations that went into where we would be removing portions of the urban growth boundary and adding them.
Anybody else have any thoughts before we close here?
You did a calculation in the Goose Creek study with the number of residential, each land use plan or the proposal you had the estimated number of rooftops with the land use options
That's correct.
and the estimated number of commercial. We already kind of know what the commercial side, most of it. But these changes, I'm curious how that panned out. I saw 5,000 rooftops once. I saw 6,000 rooftop option. Do you know what that is?
It's because we don't create required minimum or maximum densities for the design concepts. It's really hard to tabulate. That was all done by the consultants that we hired as part of the Goose Creek study to really help give us 3 options that we brought before you, which also ended up including and factoring in the Carruthers extension and whether that would be a northbound interchange or a flyover or not be involved at all. And so all of that did end up going into these recommendations. Now, when staff was reviewing how the Carruthers alignment was going to impact the design concepts for these handful of parcels right here in the center, it was really focused on trying to keep continuity of the land uses and the design concepts on the western side of where Carruthers would be. So that was a lot of the portions of it. Now, mixed residential could end up looking exactly the same as single family residential when a developer comes in and they want to develop it. They can do only single family homes if they want to. So it could end up being the exact same number of theoretical rooftops. But it could also incorporate a handful more as, they may choose to do duplexes or townhomes at a higher rate than would be allowed in just the single family residential design concept.
Got it. Thank you.
What kicks in a referendum for annexation and how does that work?
So I believe as part of the county growth plan update, the municipalities all agreed that there will be no more annexation via referendum. So it,
Yeah, so there's really two ways that a referendum can kick in for annexation. One is if you were to request annexation outside of the urban growth boundary for a municipality. So we have done referendums in this area before the UGB was extended. When we went through the county growth plan process, all the municipalities got together and drafted an interlocal agreement that was approved by each municipality that agreed that municipalities would no longer annex outside their current UGBs.
Okay.
So that eliminates that one option for referendum. However, if the city was interested in annexing without a property owner's request, you could identify a certain area that the city would be interested in annexation and hold a referendum, and if you had the majority of property owners vote to come into the city, you could annex the entire area of that referendum, where the referendum was held. I don't see that as something that is likely to happen in the city of Franklin, but again, that would be ultimately up to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen if they saw that as a need or not.
Because you hear people say sometimes, I don't want to be in the city. Don't annex me.
We've
So I just
never pursued that route or recommended that route in
Good,
the
good.
past. So I can't say what the future may hold, but that's not something we've ever explored in the past.
Good.
All right. Closing thoughts, anyone? Good. Any new business? Any additional business? Any announcements?
I will just, for those of you that will be staying for Planning Commission, so most of you, just as a reminder, if you could ask to be recognized by the chair, it helps me with the microphones a little bit. So if you're wanting to speak, just say chair or something like that so I can get your microphone turned on before you get to the content of what you're
Start
saying.
talking. Yeah.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
All right. With that, we'll adjourn this meeting.